Okay, so when you picture a prosecutor, what comes to mind? Probably some sharp lawyer from a TV show, right? Someone laser-focused on getting that conviction, the ultimate tough-on-crime figure. But what if I told you that winning isn't actually their job? That their real duty is something completely different and way more important? Let's get into it.
And look, this isn't just a nice thought. This is a direct quote from the U.S. Supreme Court from way back in 1935. Think of it as the North Star for every federal prosecutor. Their job isn't to pile up wins. It's to make sure that justice shall be done. And that one little phrase, honestly, it changes everything about how we should see their role.
So you might be thinking, okay, that's a powerful quote, but is it just a nice idea hanging on an office wall? And the answer is a hard no. It's actually the foundation for real, concrete, mandatory rules that every single federal prosecutor has to follow. We're not talking about suggestions here. These are constitutional obligations.
So here's the bottom line. That duty to do justice gets translated into a very specific constitutional guarantee, the right to a fair trial. And how do we make sure that happens? Well, it's enforced through specific rules about disclosure. This means prosecutors have to actively look for certain kinds of information and hand it over to the defense, even if the defense never asks for it.
This brings us to the first of two really big Supreme Court cases that spell out exactly what prosecutors have to disclose. It all kicks off with a case called Brady v. Maryland, and it created a groundbreaking rule about evidence and basic fairness.
The whole Brady rule revolves around this term, exculpatory evidence. Sounds kind of technical, right? But the idea is actually super simple. If a prosecutor has any information, literally anything, that points to the defendant being innocent or maybe just less guilty, they are constitutionally required to give it to the defense. It's not the prosecution's evidence to hide.
And what's wild is just how broad this is. We're not just talking about some bombshell piece of evidence that completely exonerates someone. It could be something that just doesn't quite fit with the prosecution's story, or evidence that supports a claim like self-defense. It could even be information that might just lead to a lighter sentence. A prosecutor's job is to hunt this stuff down and turn it all over.
Okay, so let's move on to the second major rule of disclosure. Because, a fair trial isn't just about the facts of the case itself. It's also about whether you can trust the people who are telling the story. And that is exactly where the Giglio rule comes into play.
The Giglio rule is all about what's called impeachment information. Now, this is any piece of information that could make a jury look at a prosecution witness and think, I'm not so sure I believe this person. It's not about the defendant's guilt or innocence directly, it's about the believability of the government's witnesses.
And just look at how deep this goes. Did a key witness tell a totally different story before? Does that witness have their own criminal record? Did the government offer them a deal, like money or reduced charges to get them to testify? Or what if a police officer testifying has a history of misconduct? All of that, every single bit of it, is Giglio material, and it must be disclosed.
Now, you'd think that those two rules, Brady and Giglio, are pretty solid. And they are, but for the U.S. Department of Justice, those constitutional rules are just the starting point. They're the floor, not the ceiling. The DOJ's own internal policy actually holds its prosecutors to an even higher standard.
I love this comparison because it makes it so clear. See, the law technically only requires prosecutors to disclose evidence if it's material, which basically means there's a good chance it could have changed the outcome of the trial. But DOJ policy, it says you have to disclose stuff that casts substantial doubt on evidence, even if it doesn't quite meet that high legal bar. The internal motto is basically, when in doubt, disclose it.
And just think about how massive this responsibility is. A prosecutor's duty to search for this information isn't just limited to the files on their own desk. No way. It covers the entire prosecution team. That means the FBI agent who ran the investigation, the local cop who made the initial traffic stop, any other government official who was involved. The prosecutor is responsible for what all of them know. That is a huge job.
So how does this all actually work day to day? Well, it really breaks down into this pretty clear three-step process. First, they have to proactively gather all this info from everyone on the team. Second, they have to review everything. We're talking files, notes, emails, to see what needs to be turned over. And third, they have to disclose it to the defense, with enough time for them to actually use it.
All right, so we've walked through the rules, the policies, the whole process. But let's just zoom out for a second and ask the most important question. Why does any of this really matter?
Because at the end of the day, these aren't just some boring legal technicalities. They are the absolute bedrock of our justice system. They're the safeguards that are supposed to protect innocent people from being wrongfully convicted.
They ensure that verdicts are based on all the facts, not just some of them. This is what gives us confidence that the system's goal is actually justice.
Which really leaves us with a big, lingering question to think about. We live in a world where prosecutors are often judged by their conviction rates, by their win-loss record. The pressure to win is very real. So in that kind of system, how do we make sure that this higher duty, the pursuit of real justice, always comes first?